An abstract that is well written is already going to tell you what sort of things to expect from a study, and it can help you to make some judgment calls about whether it's worth you reading further. If you read the introduction next, then it's still much shorter, but it should capture the full spirit of the entire paper. So it should tell you where you should expect to see what, and it should tell you what sort of things are coming. And then finally, I will always read the discussion first before I read the rest of the body, because the discussion then is going to tell me what are the key insights coming out of the study. It also should ideally tell me how these findings relate to existing knowledge, therefore the new contributions that are coming out of this, and there should be some time spent on discussing the implications. So if you read all papers like this, one of the things that it helps with is that I think these 3 sections are the most digestible sections of any paper that you will read. Anything else in between, the literature reviews, the methods, the presentation of results, they can be field specific, they can be heavy on technical terminology, and they can make it very difficult for you to get a good grasp on what the main message is. So by reading the abstract, the introduction, and the discussion/concluding section, then you will be able to get a good general understanding of what the study entails. And then this allows you to read the more difficult parts of a paper, less encumbered by the issues that come with that. So let's see what is happening with this Your Brain on ChatGPT Study. I'm going to start with a disclaimer. So those of you who know me know that I'm anti-AI when it comes to academic writing. So this is a kind of paper that leans in towards my own thinking and my own inclinations when it comes to the use of AI tools. And so as a result, throughout this process, I also should be checking my own biases and trying to make sure that I am not contaminating the text with my own perspective or imposing my own view on what the writers find, and still being critical in any case about the things that I will find. So the abstract, I already read it, and what you will see is that there's already so much text that I have highlighted. There's a lot of mini notes that I have made, and this is because these are very condensed texts. We do know that in practice, when I read an abstract, it's more than just the information that is in there, but there's a lot to be taken out that we are interested in, and this is what I'm going to take you through. So how do you read an abstract, and why is it better than an AI summary? In general, when you read abstracts, they're going to give you 5 bits of information. So they will tell you what the study is about. They may have a research question or specify a research goal, but you should know what the study is about. They should tell you what methods were applied in terms of addressing this particular question or achieving the research objective. They should also tell you then what are the key findings. So they may have a dozen findings, but usually they will focus on the most important ones, anything between 2 to 5. Then they should spend some time discussing the implications for research. So what are the research implications of these findings, and also for practice, but also what are the contributions? So 5 things that you can expect to find from abstract. It can happen that it is less. So I once wrote for a journal where they said we only want facts in the abstract. So all you had to do was the first 3 things. You had to say, what is the study about? What are the methods adopted? And what are the key findings coming from the study? So anything else, like contribution, will be my own claim about the value of the work, and there might be some subjective element to that. They were not interested in it. Implications for research and practice, these are also my own judgments, of course, within reason and with ways of us measuring whether they are right, but still they're about a researcher's best guess about what it means to apply these findings going forward in research and in practice. So as a result, they were not interested in that. So when we go through this abstract, we're just going to check how many of these 5 elements are represented in the abstract and what are the key issues that probably emerge, so the questions that we might have going into the introduction. So from my reading of the abstract, you see that I already made my notes. The things that are important coming out of this is that they are clear about the focus of the study. They say the study focuses on finding the cognitive cost of using an LLM in the educational context of writing an essay. So this is something that is very, very specific. This cognitive cost, it's within the context of essay writing, and it relates to the use of Gen AI tools, or what we're calling large language models, which will be the more appropriate term because AI covers a lot of things. So by being specific and saying it's about large language models, then we know that we're in the space of Gen AI and looking at it from a text processing viewpoint. Then they also talk about the methods. So they had participants, 54 in total, that were assigned to 3 groups. So the 3 groups were what they call the LLM groups. So these are the groups of students that were given access to an AI tool, ChatGPT to be specific, and they could write in 3 rounds of essay writing being assisted by ChatGPT. The second group was what they called the search engine group. So they were given access to a search engine. Let's call it Google. I'm not sure at the moment what it was. So they could use search engines to assist them in the process of writing the essay. Then the third group is what they called the brain-only group. So this group did not have access to any other tools except their brains, and they could read up on things and then complete the task. So for 3 sessions, these 3 groups worked in exactly this format. A group that for over 3 essays had access to an LLM or ChatGPT. For 3 sessions, a group that had access to a search engine. And for 3 sessions, a group that used only their brain to do the writing. Then in the 4th session, they did a switcheroo. And then with this switcheroo, what they did is, from what I can read or from what I can remember, the search engine only group disappears, and now they take the group that was using only their brain and they allow them to use an LLM to complete the 4th assignment. Whereas the group that was using an LLM has this tool taken away from them and they're asked to use just their brain to complete the task. And then they try to measure what happens and see what happens coming out of that. So they also talk about the different types of tools that they use in order to evaluate the study. So for example, they use EEG, electroencephalography. I didn't even know that's what EEG stands for. And they record the participants' brain activity. So they're able to track what they're calling cognitive engagement and cognitive load. Cognitive load, I think many of us will have heard that term by now because it's one of the primary arguments that people use for supporting AI tools. They say if you use these tools, they help you to reduce your cognitive load and then you can focus on more important tasks. I'm not sure what cognitive engagement is because this is not my specialty, this is not my field, but I'm guessing the extent to which your brain is actually engaged in completing the task. So we will see later what these terms mean. I would assume that at the very least when they come to the literature review section, they will spend some time on unpacking these terms. And then they also want to gain a deeper understanding of neural activations during the essay writing tasks. So what is happening to our brains and what are the connections being established as we do this. For analysis, they use natural language processing. So this is something that at least I understand quite vaguely from the linguistics people, where you just look at how people use natural language, the frequency of occurrence of certain terms, for example. All of these things they are able to measure quite concretely. And it's so specific to the point that it's actually possible through linguistics, corpus linguistics methods, to actually be able to pinpoint a piece of work that was written by me if they have enough data. So individuals do write in very specific ways, but then also at a general level, they're able to say something about how populations generally communicate across different settings. So this I already found to be very, very interesting. And then they interviewed each participant after each session. And then when it came to the essays, at least that's what I understand later, it doesn't become clear in the abstract, they performed scoring with the help of human teachers. So they got people who are already working in the academic space as teachers, and they asked them to assess the essays that were written by all the students. And then they also had an AI judge, so an AI agent that was created specifically for the task of assessing the work that was produced. Then we come to the findings. So the abstract then gives us their key findings, which are already interesting. So one of the things that they say is that the brain-only groups the search engine and brain-only groups had significantly different neural connectivity patterns, reflecting divergent cognitive strategies. So this is already suggesting that something is happening to our brains depending on the tool that we access. And then we are going to see what that thing is and what is actually coming out of it. So brain connectivity is systematically scaled down with the amount of external support. The brain-only group exhibited the strongest, widest ranging networks. Search engine group showed intermediate engagement, and LLM assistance elicited the weakest overall coupling, right? So it looks like from the perspective of brain activity and the expected, let's call it the cognitive engagement, the brain-only group did significantly better, followed by the search engine group, and at the bottom of the pile was the ChatGPT group. One thing that they also say is that as they look at this, another key finding is that when they switch over, right? So when they took the LLM group and asked them to complete the task without the assistance of ChatGPT, and then took the brain-only group and gave them access to ChatGPT to complete the fourth assignment, then they see that the people who went from ChatGPT to using their brains showed weaker neural connectivity and under engagement of alpha and beta networks. I don't know what that means, but I get the sense that, again, they seem to be at a disadvantage. And the brain to LLM participants demonstrated higher memory recall and re-engagement of widespread occipital, parietal, and prefrontal nodes. So something to do with regions of the brain. But what does it mean? Likely supporting the visual processing similar to the one frequently perceived in the search engine group. So here the terms already get quite technical, and they seem to be like more for an audience that would understand what these readings mean and what sort of things we get. But as a lay person who is not a specialist in the field, I do get the sense that, okay, there are significant differences between the groups, and that in the fourth round, when they switch, there's a bigger benefit for the group that use their brain only for the first three essays, and then we're given access to ChatGPT to complete the fourth one, whereas they don't see much of a benefit for the group that started on ChatGPT and then had to use their brain. Then another key finding that they discuss is that the reported ownership of LLM groups' essays in the interview was low. So the students who had access to the ChatGPT for the vast majority of the essays reported lower ownership of the content that they generated. Then the search engine group had strong ownership, but less than the brain-only group. So the strongest ownership is attributed to the group that used their brains to complete the tasks. The LLM group also fell behind in their ability to quote from the essays they wrote just minutes prior. So this is another key finding, right? So are you able to quote what you wrote? Can you tell us anything about what was in the essay? So those who use their brains were in a better position to do it than those that hadn't. And then what they go on to discuss now are the sort of implications for practice. So as the educational impact of LLM use only begins to settle with the general population, in this study, we demonstrate the pressing matter of a likely decrease in learning skills based on the results of our study. The use of LLM had a measurable impact on participants, and while the benefits were initially apparent, so there was no denying that there were benefits to these tools, as we demonstrated over the course of 4 months. So it's kind of longitudinal, but not really. So 4 essays over 4 months is not really a long time span. The LLM group's participants performed worse than their counterparts in the brain-only group at all levels, at the neural level, at the linguistic level, and at the scoring level. And I'm not sure what scoring is, but at least we do understand that even linguistically, there were traces that there was a disadvantage for the group that was using ChatGPT to assist their essay writing process. So they close this abstract by saying, we hope the study serves as a preliminary guide to understanding the cognitive and practical impacts of AI on learning environments. So if I look at this abstract, right, before reflecting on what is being packed, I said, okay, a good abstract should tell me what the study is about. They do that. It should also tell me something about the methods used. It does do that, although some of it doesn't immediately become clear, right? So I do know that there were 18 participants among each group for the first 3 sessions, but in session 4, they have a total of 18 participants, and I don't know how they're distributed between the 2 groups. So if they had just switched the groups, then we would have expected 36 participants. So where did the other 18 go? That's a question that is not immediately addressed. And it's only later that they say this is a 4-month-long study, whereas I would have expected to see that as part of the disclosure on the methods. But it's good. At least I know from the abstract they do this over a course of 4 months. They also do give the key results, which are very, very interesting. But the terms are so technical that for me, as a lay reader, I am struggling, right? I either have to reach for some kind of encyclopedia that tells me what these terms mean, or I have to wait until later in the paper to fully understand what those terms mean. And this is always a tricky thing that academic writers face, right? If you use basic language too much, then it could mean that even your own peers don't recognize your expertise. So I think we're always trying to achieve a careful balance between speaking to our audience and showing that we are experts in a particular field, but also making the writing accessible to other people. So jargon, I don't think, is something that we can fully escape when it comes to academic writing. But what I do appreciate is that even though I don't understand some of the jargon, I do understand what the key insights are. And this will be sufficient, I think, at this stage in terms of communicating the key results. And then finally, they do talk about implications, but it looks like they are more focused on the practical implications, right? So they're saying, we do see that there is a likely decrease in learning skills if people rely too much on LLM, and therefore we have to think about how we do teaching, which is something that then I'm like, okay, fine. But are there any implications for the theory of education, for example? How we approach that would have been nice, but not necessarily important, because the 3 most important things are addressed. And then they also personalize it, something that's rarely done, but something that also people will do, that they talk about personally what they hope the study is going to achieve going forward. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting when I go through this abstract is that when you look at the very first paragraph with just 3 sentences, they do say by the 3rd sentence what they do, but it doesn't become apparent why they choose to focus on this. So this is what the first paragraph reads like. With today's wide adoption of LLM products like ChatGPT from OpenAI, humans and businesses engage and use LLMs on a daily basis. Like any other tool, it carries its own set of advantages and limitations. This study focuses on finding out the cognitive cost of using an LLM in the educational context of writing an essay. So it doesn't become clear to me how they make this jump from acknowledging the advantages and limitations to zooming in on something very specific, right? So it's not just limitations in general, but it's the cognitive cost in particular. And then they also pick the educational context of writing an essay, and why not anything else? Usually there wouldn't be enough word space in the abstract to do this, but I would have I probably appreciated a softer landing, like something that gives me insight into why the cognitive cost. Is it a limitation that's mostly been ignored, but we see emerging evidence for it everywhere? Why are we picking this thing in particular? But then, with all that said, it's very clear what the study sets out to do. So whenever you are reading articles and you have to pick the ones that are relevant for your work, this is why the abstract is such a powerful starting point. because it gives you all the information you need to make an evaluation about, is this information potentially useful for me? And if it is useful, then what are the sort of things that are going to come out of it that help me with my own particular study? So if you were not interested in cognitive cost, you put it in the irrelevant pile. You don't need to read the rest of it. But if you are, then you know this is something that's potentially relevant. But are you interested in it in an educational context, or are you interested in it in a professional context? So all these things are meant to help you to make the decisions about your work. Results are also important. Anything that you see that jumps at you and you think, okay, I'd be interested to know more and dig deeper. So whenever you start the process of reading academic articles, instead of reaching for an AI summary, just reach for the abstract and read it, because it's written by the authors themselves. For most of the part, we start to see AI-generated abstracts, and it's not going particularly well. But assuming that the authors wrote it, or they checked what the AI wrote, then you are going to get all the information that you need in something like 100 to 250 words, and it helps you to make all the important decisions pertaining to that paper.